Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Dan, and this is Forlorn Hobbies. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Now, I hope everyone has had a good Easter for those who have celebrated it. It's been a rather hectic time here for me, with lots of things going on, some travelling, and the crazy decision to tidy up my hobby room, which can only be described as a chaotic dump at the moment. So it's led to a rather lackluster effort from my hobby productivity recently, hence the lack of uploads. Now, today I'm going to look at my next project. As you can tell on this channel, we start lots of projects and doesn't quite seem to finish them, but there is a method to this madness. Now, we are going to be looking at the project that I will be doing for our next kind of big meetup game with the guys from our kind of COVID support group, and we have decided with the release, I think, of the relatively new War of the Roses supplement that we are going to delve into that. Now, there is also some talk of having an Ancients game, so this project may be put to one side and focus on that instead. But, we're quite a laid back group. We haven't really made a firm decision, so I'm hoping that this video will kind of kickstart our motivation across the board a little bit as well. Now, before we get into the nitty details of my plans, I just wanted to kind of take a step back and just look at the overall why War of the Roses in general. From a kind of historical perspective, it is a fascinating subject to look at once you go down the many rabbit holes that exist. But I think that is what causes the War of the Roses to be overlooked, because most people, especially people that aren't really historically inclined, will just write it off as a bit of a in-house temper tantrum as to who gets the best inheritance. And that's pretty much all they'll be able to tell you, that two different branches of the family didn't like each other and they thought they should each rule the kingdom. But I think, as yes, that is a good basic summary of the situation, but I think the key players are, although related to the family, are actually outside of the family. Like, you have the huge influence of Warwick, the Kingmaker as he is known, and as well as the Beauforts themselves. That's kind of like the breakdown that I would give it. York isn't annoyed with Henry. He is annoyed with the Beauforts and their influence. He then has the massive strop, leads to him being killed. Then Warwick and the Earl of March have a massive strop and take over the country. The Beauforts kick and scream again. Margaret of Anjou has a bit of a strop, and then they fight back. And it goes back and forth until Henry Tudor finally unites the two warring houses. And obviously that is a very niche kind of overview, but I would thoroughly recommend looking into the period and looking at some of the minor players as well, because there is so many layers to this era of history that get completely overlooked. You've got the rivalries between the Percys and the Nevilles in the north. You've got the Staffords, Stanleys. And then you've got the issues in Wales between the Marshalls and the Tudors, for example. So, it's something that, like all areas of history, the more you look into it, the more fascinating it becomes. And obviously, it has and increased popularity now as the inspiration for the phenomenon that is Game of Thrones. Now, we won't talk about the final series of that here because that was a bit of a letdown, but the political intrigue that you enjoyed throughout most of the show could have come straight out of the day-to-day engagements of the War of the Roses. You had the powerful families like the Lannisters, the Starks, you had the Beauforts, you had York, you had Neville, Percy. They're all there and kind of represented with subtle hints and homages, so to speak, in that series. So I would thoroughly recommend researching and just going down that rabbit hole. Now, the first issue I faced was obviously determining whether I wanted to be the goodies or the baddies in this kind of project. Now, for once, I thought I would take one for the team because Tim is my normal opponent and he is a true Yorkshire lad. So I kind of let him have the goodies, and that meant that I was left to be the baddies. So, in true spirit of generosity, I then had to resign myself to that dirty feeling of being on the Lancastrian side, and then I set about kind of looking for inspiration among the kind of Lancastrian nobles to kind of find a key figure that I could build the forces around. And as the War of the Roses is quite a long conflict, it's about 30 years, give or take, and the characters obviously change substantially in that time, because you start off with the Mortimer's Cross, for example, and it ends at Bosworth, where Henry VII defeats Richard III. Now, my first thoughts was, I'll do a Tudor force because that is slightly less dirty to me. But I then thought about the playability and adaptability of that force. Now, I'm someone that likes to have the flags, the heraldry, and obviously, if I was to do a Henry VII Tudor army, then that heraldry would be very much locked into the kind of final phase of the War of the Roses, and it wouldn't really be suitable to be used earlier, say at Towton or Tewkesbury or Mortimer's Cross. So I wanted to kind of find a family that could be used throughout the period. So that led me embracing the darkness fully and settling on the Beaufort family and the Dukes of Somerset. Now, I didn't want to be the chief big baddie, which is obviously the Duke of Somerset that falls out with Richard of York, because again that would very much limit it to the beginnings of the war in terms of the support that he could have alongside him to fill out the divisions. So I was rummaging through various source books and was also watching the White Queen, and decided kind of very randomly, this came out of nowhere, to settle on the Battle of Tewkesbury because it was kind of pinpointed in the middle of the war. It had the Duke of Somerset present. It had enough other nobles to build the divisions out to represent that kind of versatility within like the heraldry and uniforms that were present, and it gave a good variety of options that then also meant that I could easily play other battles of that era, kind of all the way up from the beginning of the war all the way kind of, maybe not Bosworth, but it gave me a good depth of options that I could easily adapt it to later on. Now, the final thing that kind of sold it for me was looking into the Battle of Tewkesbury itself. Now, this should have been an easy victory for the Lancastrians. They had very good positions, but there was a rather rash commander that kind of went gun-ho and straight into the mix instead of using the terrain to their advantage, and it pretty much cost them the battle. And yes, I am talking about Edmund Beaufort, the fourth and last Beaufort, Duke of Somerset. So that kind of sold me on the project completely, because I was the bad guy, but I was a very bad, in the good sense of the term bad guy, because he was that bad he may as well have been a Yorkist, because it was through his actions, I think, that had a huge impact on Edward regaining the throne for York. So, why is it that I think that the fourth Duke of Somerset was in fact a closet Yorkist? Well, he was the nobleman that was in charge of the City of London after the restoration of Henry VI in 1470, and he was tasked with defending the king. Now, when Edward decided to reclaim his throne a year later, Somerset was nowhere to be seen in London, and it led to Edward being able to be welcomed back into the city unopposed, giving him a much stronger position for the Battle of Barnet, which was where Warwick the Kingmaker met his untimely end, and saw the three sons of York reunite victorious on the battlefield. So, what did Somerset do after that? Well, he ran to his power base in the West Country, specifically Cornwall, raised forces, and met up with Margaret of Anjou and Edward of Westminster at Plymouth, and marched to try and rejoin the Lancastrian power base in Tudor-dominated Wales, and that should have been plain and easy sailing. But no, the city of Gloucester held loyal to Edward and the Yorks, so the Lancastrians had to further march up the river to Tewkesbury, where they were hoping to meet up with the forces under Jasper Tudor that had been brought to assist them, and face the tired and ragged Yorkist army of Edward. Now, the Lancastrians had arguably the much better positions. There was quite a lot of obstacles in the way that were heavily defendable, but this leads me on to the second convincing part that Somerset was in fact a Yorkist agent, because he abandoned those positions and charged headlong into Edward's isolated battle, thinking that he could, in a swift movement, end the war. So he was either incredibly pig-headed and brave, or, crazy, because it made no sense for him to abandon those positions in the way that he did. Once engaged with Edward, he was flanked by the Duke of Gloucester's battle, and on the other flank by some cavalry that Edward had hidden in some woods, which meant that he routed very, very quickly. His troops were pretty much all cut down, but not Somerset. And this is, I think, what makes him, beyond great in my mind, is that in his own stubbornness, pig-headedness, whatever it is you want to call it, arrogance, he could not see that the fault was his own. And although this isn't a completely historical, accurate account, it was documented by historians and chroniclers such as Edward Hall 50 years after the fact, so I really hope it was true. When all was lost, he rode back, fleeing on his charger, to Baron Wenlock, who commanded the Lancastrian centre, asked him, or rather demanded of him, why the hell hadn't he followed up and supported him in his attack. It would have been a clean victory. And then before Wenlock could even answer, Somerset smashed him over the head with his war axe as he galloped past on the way to safety. Now, if that didn't completely destroy the remaining Lancastrian morale, I don't know what did. So, I think, although he met his untimely end moments later after being dragged out of Sanctuary and executed, I think those were a pretty heroic and cool way to go out for a Lancastrian. So that is what really sold the plan to me, and I could stomach being a Lancastrian because, who can argue with someone heroically charging, getting absolutely beaten up, fleeing back, and then turning on his ally and smashing his head in on the way past, completely ending the battle before it had really even started, in a victory for the House of York, which led to the security of England for the next decade until Edward's untimely death. And then that's when everything started to go wrong again. So, on to the plans. So, for the planned list itself, we'll obviously be using the Hail Caesar War of the Roses supplement. Now, this was a fascinating read because it was an area of wargaming that didn't really have any rules for Hail Caesar. You could kind of loosely use stats or house rules from elsewhere to kind of bring it together, but I think this supplement really gives character to that late medieval, early Renaissance kind of power change in terms of gaming, and it can only be seen as a positive in my mind. So I've loosely stuck to the army list suggestions, but overall my main concern is the aesthetics and the kind of cost effectiveness of this collection. So I will predominantly be building the army around the plastics available from the Perrys, which is the Mounted Men-at-Arms, the War of the Roses Foot Knights, War of the Roses Infantry, and the European Mercenaries. So, obviously, the first division, or battle, is going to be led by the Duke of Somerset himself. Now, for this one, I wanted a more uniformed kind of look, so I have chosen to have 3 regiments of household. Now, one of these will be upgraded to have men-at-arms and the Calais garrison, just to fill out some points, but really this centre unit will represent his kind of ducal retinue from his main estates, as well as some other estates kind of banded together. They will also be accompanied by 2 units of mounted men-at-arms. Now, the army list has a caveat of 10% of cavalry per army, so obviously I would need to have 20 units for this. Now, in most games I will only be fielding 1 unit of cavalry, but because cavalry units are small in this period and in the rules, I won't be using a whole box of mounted men-at-arms to make this unit. So I have half a box, another unit's worth. So they're in just to kind of get rid of any wastage that would have occurred if I had just left the 1 unit. The second battle or division will be led by the Earl of Devon, John Courtenay. Now he is the cousin and close kinsman of the Duke of Somerset and was involved at Tewkesbury, obviously, dying supporting his cousin in that route. So I went for a little bit more of a loose kind of formed army, but trying to get more units in. So I've included 3 units of longbowmen and 2 units of billmen. Now this is predominantly based on the kind of numbers that I was looking at when looking at the Perry boxes, and I think you get 18 billmen and up to 32 longbowmen, but those numbers vary slightly because you can only make, I think, 40 in a box. So it was kind of, that ratio was decided purely based on the availability and cost effectiveness, but it also kind of reflects the armies of the time, where you would be more kind of like the peasantry would be more likely to have hunting bows, longbows, than they would billmen. So I thought that that would be a good distinction for a lesser noble, such as the Earl, and yeah, it gives a little bit of variety. Now the red livery of the Earl of Devon will offer a very nice contrast to the white and blue of the Beaufort Duke of Somerset. So again, gives me a nice bit of variety. And then that moved on to the third battle. Now, I struggled with this battle because I wanted to have a little bit of variety. I didn't want to just repeat the generic kind of War of the Roses kind of, household longbowman, billman kind of look. So I chose to bring in some European mercenaries, which is a great feature of the army list. You can bring in Irish troops, you can bring in Welsh troops and stuff like that. So I thought I'll go for some European mercenaries with pikes and handguns that would be led by that would have come over with Margaret of Anjou and Edward of Westminster. So I thought that would be the third battle. I'd also put 2 units of men-at-arms, which would be billmen with the men-at-arms upgrade, just to represent the elite troops that would be guarding the Lancastrian Prince of Wales and the Lancastrian Queen, and just as a way to kind of get some Henry VI heraldry in there as well. Now, a couple of field guns can be included, so obviously I've included those as well, just to round out that army. And that would be how I would play it, but if I wanted to stay true to the army list specifically with what I have included, I need to add a 4th battle or division. Now this was where I had some kind of struggle into deciding who and what I should go for. Now my initial thoughts were I could have Baron Wenlock and the centre, but I mean, if you're going to get your head caved in by your own guy, I'm not going to paint you. So that kind of wrote him off, because it would have just been more of the same household longbowman, billman. There wasn't any variety in it. I then turned to looking at having the Earl of Ormond, or Wiltshire, James Butler. However, his heraldry was very hard to locate in the flags that I wanted to use, and there was a lot of confusion because there was two Earls of Wiltshire at this time. Obviously there was a Yorkist one and a Lancastrian one, because a lot of territories changed hands depending on who was loyal to where. Take Jasper Tudor's Earl of Pembroke, that was given to William Herbert by Edward. So there was a lot of confusion going on. So I couldn't find any accurate heraldry for the Lancastrian Earl of Ormond. So I settled with having a, should we say, a morale boosting division that can just stand across the river and wave at them, led by Jasper Tudor, the Earl of Pembroke. Now, this allowed me to get in some kind of foreign troops, but not foreign mercenaries, more like kind of Irish troops that I wanted to get in under Ormond. So I'm going to have 2 units of Irish Kerns upgraded to Gallowglass, but they're going to represent Welsh, like kind of huntsmen that have been raised, in my mind anyway, and then some longbowmen and a unit of men-at-arms just to represent that Welsh element of the conflict, really. So that gives me the 20 units that I need to make the 2 units of cavalry legal. It gives me a varied collection, and it also gives me enough flexibility, I think, to be able to play games throughout, specifically the first 2 phases of the Wars of the Roses. And Bosworth will just be like a kind of end event. I can use Jasper Tudor for that, so I'm quite happy in that regard. I can then just add on maybe a Henry VII retinue or small division at the end of it if I ever get bored and want to have a Bosworth specific. But besides that, I think I can cover most games and be relatively happy with their historical kind of accuracy for the time period itself. So in total, that rounds the list off at 750 points. Now this is quite a large force for Hail Caesar, but I think it's a good round number to kind of work towards. Kind of multiples of 250 I find quite a lot work well in points-based games, and it will also offer enough flexibility, I think, to play smaller games as well, with the options that would be available to me from it. So that is that for this planning video. Now, for those of you that have stuck around and the regular viewers that are thinking, oh, he's not finished the Russians or the Barons War stuff, well, that will be coming soon. In fact, my next video hopefully will be out next week, which is an update on the Russians project, and then there will be a video hopefully on the Barons War to kind of go alongside the release of the 2nd edition at the end of the month. Maybe a week late, I'm not sure yet, because I think I might need to have the box first to have a little look and go from there. Now, hopefully I will be able to get back and get videos out more regularly again, because Tim has not signed me up for many events in the next few weeks, and the next couple of months in fact. I think all I've got in the calendar is a Horus Heresy event at the end of May. So if you're into that, look out for the event review of that dropping kind of early June. And of course I've also not forgotten the dreaded Prussians that are the result of me failing a bet for the Eagles to Glory event as well, but I have quite a cool idea for that, so stay tuned, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, enjoy your hobby.